talking to the sheriff of Rock Ridge.
Easy. It's frivolous.
Right.
And I started to argue, and then I argued for about 20 minutes until I was...
Also, as an actor, we have to observe behavior. I've always observed behavior of all kinds of people.
Blazing Saddles was already the movie Hollywood tried to censor. But there's one forbidden scene so outrageous it never saw the light of day.
Slaves? You sang like birds. Come on, how about a
Buried for decades, whispered about in Hollywood circles, and deemed too dangerous for audiences. It's finally being revealed. For decades, Blazing Saddles has been picked apart, debated, and endlessly quoted. But there's one detail almost every fan has missed. It's not a lost scene, a surprise cameo, or even backstage drama. No, it's right there in plain sight, delivered so quietly that even the most devoted viewers never caught it. And once you see it, it completely changes the way you experience the film. Because what if the wildest comedy of its time only works because of the calmest performance on screen? One overlooked moment holds the entire movie together. And it was never even in the script.
The duties of the office of sheriff in and for the township of Rock Ridge.
Blazing Saddles isn't just another comedy. It's the film that nearly broke Hollywood. Released in 1974, Mel Brooks' masterpiece dared to mock racism, politics, and even the very system that funded it. At a time when studios were terrified of controversy, Brooks turned the entire industry upside down, throwing conventions and taboos into a blender and daring audiences to laugh at the aftermath. But here's the suspicious part. While audiences laughed at fart jokes, racial punchlines, and absurd slapstick, insiders whispered about what we didn't see. Hollywood censors and executives chopped scenes, killed jokes, and buried anything they thought was too explosive for the public. Entire moments of satirical fury, lines that would have directly skewered the establishment or laid bare the absurdity of systemic racism, were cut, leaving only what could be sold to a mainstream audience. And in that era, the power structures of Hollywood had no problem rewriting history to protect themselves, taking credit for comedy while sanitizing its subversive teeth. Back in the 70s, studios were run by gatekeepers who operated more like secret societies than businesses. They controlled which films got greenlit, what jokes were acceptable, and which actors were quietly blacklisted if they pushed boundaries too far. Blazing Saddles? It was a direct threat to that control. A movie so raw, so audacious, that some insiders swore it would never see the light of day. There were memos warning that audiences might riot, that certain racial gags could ruin careers, and that Cleavon Little's Sheriff Bart might be too radical for a white-dominated audience to handle.
allow anger to rule the day? As your spiritual leader, I implore you.
And yet, against all odds, it survived. A perfect storm of fearless writing, brilliant performances, and Brooks' unflinching refusal to compromise. The calm confidence of Bart wasn't just a character choice, it was a quiet act of rebellion. While everything around him descended into chaos, he held the film together, proving that the most revolutionary elements of Blazing Saddles weren't always the loudest or most obvious. In hindsight, the movie's genius lies in that tension. The contrast between Hollywood's panic behind the scenes and the effortless brilliance on screen.
Town ladies.
It's why the film still feels audacious today. A reminder that comedy can be a weapon, that subversion can hide in plain sight, and that sometimes the most radical thing a film can do is let its star simply exist, fully in control, in a world gone mad. Now let's get into the forbidden details. Mel Brooks originally wanted Richard Pryor for Sheriff Bart, and why wouldn't he? Pryor was electric, fearless, and already redefining comedy by slicing America's racial wounds wide open. His mere presence would have been a dare to audiences. Can you handle the truth, even if it's packaged in a joke? But Warner Bros. Got cold feet. They claimed Pryor was uninsurable because of drugs and legal problems. Let's not kid ourselves. This was Hollywood in the 1970s, when budgets were practically built into production costs, and liability was just a buzzword tossed around to cover up racism and cowardice. The truth was simple. Pryor scared them. He wasn't going to play nice, he wasn't going to soften the edges, and he sure as hell wasn't going to let white executives dictate how blackness was portrayed on screen. Enter Cleavon Little. On paper, he was the safer choice. Yale-trained, Broadway-polished, professional, and seemingly less combustible than Pryor. But Brooks knew what he was doing. Little didn't just replace Pryor, he weaponized subtlety. Where Pryor would have been a Molotov cocktail, Little was dynamite with a longer fuse. Charming, witty, poised, and devastatingly sharp. His Sheriff Bart wasn't just a character. He was a cultural Trojan horse. He walked into an all-white Western town, into the middle of Hollywood's carefully controlled racial fantasies, and owned the place. That was radical. Think about it. In 1974, the wounds of segregation weren't healed. America was still rioting, still fighting over schools, housing, and jobs. Hollywood, meanwhile, liked to pretend progress was happening in polite increments. Black characters, when they appeared, were often comic relief, sidekicks, or stereotypes. But Sheriff Bart? He was the law, a black man literally enforcing justice over a group of ignorant, racist white townsfolk. That wasn't just a punchline. That was an act of cultural subversion. And the backlash was real. Blazing Saddles drew fire from critics and censors before it even hit theaters. Studio executives pressured Brooks to cut entire sections, especially the racial slurs, which Pryor himself helped write. Ironically, Pryor's fingerprints were all over Bart's dialogue, even if his face wasn't. The executives wanted the edge dulled, the satire softened, the truth erased. But Brooks and Little doubled down. Little's performance was calm, sly, unbothered. And that's what made it dangerous. Instead of exploding, he smiled. Instead of screaming, he mocked. And every time Bart outsmarted the white townsfolk, it wasn't just a joke. It was a humiliation for the Hollywood machine that had spent decades keeping actors like him in the background.
Observed behavior of all kinds of people, specifically older people. I've really been fascinated by that. And it helped me to do it much easier.
Here's the kicker. Cleavon Little's Bart was so effective, so unflinching, that some insiders later admitted they feared the movie would never get distribution in the South. There were rumors that some theaters did refuse to screen it. Warner Bros. Executives even begged Brooks to edit out the infamous N-word dialogue, the very language that made the satire sting. Brooks refused. Pryor had insisted it stay in, and Little delivered it with a grace that turned slurs into satire. The controversy didn't end there. Decades later, Hollywood quietly buried Cleavon Little's legacy. While Blazing Saddles is celebrated as one of the greatest comedies ever made, Little never became the household name he deserved to be. Some argue it was because he was too closely tied to Sheriff Bart, too radical, too uncompromising. Others whisper that Hollywood punished him for daring to embody black authority in a way audiences couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, the white co-stars, Gene Wilder, Madeline Kahn, enjoyed broader recognition while Little's career stalled in comparison. A coincidence? Or just Hollywood doing what Hollywood does, praising diversity on screen while gatekeeping it off screen? So was Cleavon Little a safer choice than Richard Pryor? Maybe in the boardroom, but on screen he detonated a bomb Warner Bros. Never saw coming. His Sheriff Bart wasn't just a role. It was an act of rebellion disguised as comedy. A middle finger to Hollywood's racial hierarchy. A cultural grenade that's still smoking 50 years later. Burton Gilliam, the Texas-born character actor who played Lyle, later admitted that filming Blazing Saddles left him shaken. Every time he spat out the N-word at Cleavon Little, he said, "I felt ashamed." Gilliam even pulled Little aside to apologize, confessing he wasn't comfortable with what the script demanded. But Little, calm and razor-sharp, reassured him, "This isn't about me, it's about them." The racism wasn't aimed at him personally, it was aimed at exposing the idiocy of the villains.
Thanks to our new...
But here's where the controversy cuts deeper. By allowing it, Little wasn't just being professional. He was navigating one of the most dangerous compromises a black actor could face in 1974. On one level, he was giving Brooks and the cast permission to push the satire to its breaking point. Without that green light, Blazing Saddles would have collapsed under studio censorship. On another level, though, he was tethering himself to a system where he had to endure, absorb, and authorize the very language designed to dehumanize him. Was he complicit in Hollywood's cruelty? Or was he reclaiming power, turning the ugliest word in America into a boomerang that hit racists in the face? Mel Brooks was hyper-aware of the risk. He reportedly checked in with Little multiple times. Is this too much? Does this cross the line? Each time, Little waved it through. No, 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 it's perfect there. That wasn't just consent, it was strategy. A black actor in the mid-70s couldn't afford to look difficult. If he objected too loudly, the suits would have used it as leverage to sideline him. By saying yes, Little wasn't just protecting the satire, he was protecting his place in the film. He was playing two roles at once: Sheriff Bart, dismantling racism on screen, and Cleavon Little, quietly managing the politics of white Hollywood behind the scenes.
It's all in the dark now. And he said, and Cleavon says, I hate to disillusion you, man, but you're sucking on my arm.
And the studio hypocrisy was staggering. Warner Bros. Nearly killed the movie multiple times over bad optics. They were fine with racist westerns that erased black existence, fine with violent exploitation flicks and SX comedies that degraded women. But the minute Brooks weaponized racist language as satire, suddenly they were panicked about boycotts and headlines. That's why the title went through a carousel of names: Tex X, Black Bart, Purple Sage, as executives scrambled for a way to soften the blow. They wanted the profit, but not the responsibility. Brooks and Pryor's script wasn't subtle. The very first scene announces the game. Gilliam's Lyle spits an anti-Asian slur, orders black laborers to sing like slaves, then drops the N-word within minutes. The message was clear. This isn't polite satire. This is confrontation by laughter. Brooks didn't want audiences comfortable. He wanted them squirming, laughing, then squirming again.
Slaves? You sang like birds. Come on, how about a good old nigger song?
And he didn't shy away from frequency. The N-word is spoken 17 times in the movie, almost entirely by white characters. Each time, it makes them look more ignorant, more pathetic, more absurd. But satire is fragile. It depends on the audience getting it. Some viewers laughed at the racists being mocked. Others laughed with the slurs themselves. That's the uncomfortable truth about Blazing Saddles. Its brilliance also gave cover to people who completely missed the point. Today, that tension feels sharper than ever. In the age of cancel culture debates, Blazing Saddles is both weapon and scapegoat. Defenders like Whoopi Goldberg argue it's untouchable because it skewers every prejudice, racism, sexism, homophobia, by turning them into jokes at the bigot's expense. Critics counter that the film's casual flood of slurs makes it impossible to separate satire from harm, especially when audiences still misread it.
I did a little too much, and I improvised a little too much, and I made some lines that were kept which I wasn't that happy or that proud of. I wish I could have taken the first day over again and just sort of eased it.
So what does that leave us with? Cleavon Little, a Yale-trained black actor in 1974, forced to do something almost no other role demanded: stand tall as a symbol of black authority while simultaneously giving white actors permission to call him the most dehumanizing word in the American language. That tension, consent or compromise, reclamation or exploitation, hasn't aged a day. If anything, it's more radioactive now than it was then. One of the most notorious moments in Blazing Saddles nearly never made it to the screen: the late-night encounter between Sheriff Bart, Cleavon, Little, and cabaret singer Lily Von Stoop, Madeline Kahn. In the original script, Bart delivered a punchline so perfectly Brooksian it could only have worked because of its audacity. "But you're sucking on my arm." Classic Brooks, irreverent, cheeky, and pushing comedy to the edge.
Madeline Kahn is in her dressing room with Cleavon Little. And after they eat Schnitzengruben, she blows out the candles and she says in her German accent, "Oh, is it true? Is it true what they say about you people, how well you're built? Is it true?"
But Warner Bros. Freaked out. The line was cut before audiences ever got a chance to hear it. On paper, the executives claimed it was too crude. But really? This was Blazing Saddles, a film that gleefully threw racial slurs around like confetti, mocked lynch mobs, and staged a farting contest that went on for what felt like an eternity. The idea that sexual innuendo suddenly triggered a moral panic doesn't pass any rational smell test. The real taboo wasn't comedy. It was who was delivering it. A black man in bed with a white woman? That image alone was enough to make Hollywood's gatekeepers sweat bullets. Even in 1974, the specter of a confident, sexually autonomous black man crossing the color line was treated as dangerous, explosive, and deeply threatening. And let's not sugarcoat it. It was.
Is it true? It's all in the dark now. And he said, and Cleavon says, "I hate to disillusion you, man, but you're sucking on my arm."
Hollywood's fear wasn't about taste, it was about control. Since the days of the Hays Code, 1934 to 1968, interracial intimacy, particularly black men desiring white women, was strictly forbidden. Black actors could sing, dance, crack jokes, even be heroic or virtuous. But sexual agency? Forbidden. Showing a black man as sexually desirable, especially to a white woman, was considered a threat to the moral order, a thinly veiled excuse to uphold centuries of systemic racism. This was the same fear that fueled segregation, justified lynchings, and codified a violent social hierarchy. So here's the stunning irony. Blazing Saddles dared to put racial slurs into the mouths of white actors, to ridicule prejudice, to satirize the most absurd expressions of racism. And yet, when it came to Sewell politics, Hollywood slammed the brakes hard. Sheriff Bart could outsmart the townsfolk, humiliate their ignorance, even save lives. But showing him as a Sewell-y confident black man with a white woman, that apparently was where satire hit its hard limit. This isn't just about one cut line in one film, it's about the hypocrisy of Hollywood itself. The industry sold itself as daring, progressive, boundary-pushing, yet when it came to depicting black desire and sexual power, it folded like a cheap suit. Satire could lampoon racism, yes, but only up to the point where it threatened the very anxieties white America refused to face.
You know, the camp town.
And let's not pretend this is ancient history. Hollywood is still shackled by these taboos today, often sanitizing black sexuality, toning down interracial desire, and policing the image of black men on screen. Blazing Saddles may have dared to mock racism in theory, but in practice, it tiptoed around one of the most explosive truths, that the fear of black sexuality remains one of the oldest, most potent forms of control in American culture. So here's the uncomfortable question that Brooks' cutscene forces us to ask. Was Blazing Saddles truly fearless? Or was it still shackled by the very taboos it pretended to dismantle, mocking white supremacy on the surface, but still terrified of the raw political power of black desire? Mel Brooks always insisted that the genius of Blazing Saddles lay in its satire. The slurs, the stereotypes, the over-the-top crudity, none of it was cheap comedy. Every outrageous gag, every shocking punchline was a scalpel designed to cut through ignorance. Brooks wanted the audience to cringe first, laugh second, and then recognize that the joke wasn't on the victims, it was on the oppressors. Racists were the punchline, prejudice was the target, but here's the rub. Not everyone got the memo. Brooks himself admitted that even test audiences, and some Warner Bros. Executives, laughed at the wrong things. Instead of mocking the bigots, they laughed with them. The repeated use of the N-word became, for some, not satire, but validation. This was the nightmare scenario. A film created to humiliate ignorance ended up giving racists a playbook, wrapped in slapstick and wit.
Baby, it's a little bit difficult. He has never been in this kind of climate, and I wouldn't want him here.
This is the paradox that still haunts Blazing Saddles. The N-word wasn't just sprinkled in for shock value, it was the film's core weapon. Strip it away, and Brooks bluntly said, "You've got no movie, keep it in, and you risk handing racists their favorite slur wrapped in a punchline." Comedy here becomes a double-edged sword, devastating when wielded correctly, dangerous when misread, and the danger was real. In 1974, some white audiences walked out of theaters emboldened. For them, 17 utterances of the N-word weren't a satire of ignorance, they were affirmation. Sheriff Bart's dismantling of prejudice was lost on them. They weren't laughing at the bigotry, they were laughing with it. The film's brilliance was contingent on the audience's intelligence and awareness, and when that failed, the joke cut both ways. Hollywood itself has always been complicit in this tension. Brooks could dare to lampoon racism, but the studio panicked over a single sexual innuendo, a black man in bed with a white woman. You could hurl slurs at white faces, ridicule lynch mobs, stage fart contests, and that was safe satire. But showing black desire? That crossed a line. The industry's moral panic about SX, specifically interracial X, exposed that comedy could push boundaries in theory, but only up to a point. Blazing Saddles could mock racial ignorance freely, but it could not safely depict black sexuality. Fast forward to today, and the paradox hasn't aged. In an era of social media outrage and cancel culture, Blazing Saddles is either hailed as fearless satire or condemned as an artifact of casual cruelty disguised as comedy. Modern studios wouldn't dare touch it. PR teams and lawyers would sanitize every slur, neutering the razor-sharp commentary into harmless parody westerns filled with fart jokes. Amusing, but toothless.
Well, I love doing character roles anyway, and most of my career has sort of been on and off with that.
And yet, the film survives because it offends. It offends smartly, deliberately, dangerously. Its power is inseparable from its brutality. It laughs at hate by forcing the audience to sit with it. Uncomfortable, challenged, forced to confront their own prejudices. That's why it remains untouchable. Not because it's safe, but because it never was. The uncomfortable truth. Blazing Saddles will always straddle the razor's edge between comedy and cruelty. Some leave enlightened, others emboldened. Brooks knew it. Cleveland Little lived it. And 50 years later, the audience is still the wild card, a mirror reflecting either self-awareness or the very bigotry the film was made to expose. For decades, defenders of Blazing Saddles have leaned on the same mantra. The joke is on the racists. Every slur, every stereotype, every crude jab was designed to humiliate the ignorant white townsfolk, not the marginalized groups they ostensibly targeted. That's the shield. Satire, its champions argue, is untouchable because its aim is righteous, a high-minded critique disguised as absurd comedy. Whoopi Goldberg has been among the most vocal defenders, pointing out that the film hits everybody: racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, leaving no prejudice untouched. To her, Brooks' comedy was fearless, unflinching in a way modern Hollywood rarely dares to be. Blazing Saddles didn't whisper at social issues. It screamed them, dragging audiences through every uncomfortable truth with a sledgehammer of laughter.
That these are issues that we really face the same way. But apparently this is a...
But here's the controversy. Intent and reception are not the same. Just because satire aims to punch up doesn't mean audiences perceive it that way. In 1974, for many white viewers, the humor wasn't about mocking racists. It was about indulging in the forbidden thrill of taboo words and images on a big screen. The N-word, repeated 17 times by white characters, became shock entertainment rather than critique. The very tool Brooks used to dismantle ignorance could, and did, reinforce it in the wrong hands. Comedy became a double-edged sword. And then there's Cleavon Little, the actor who embodied this tension. As Sheriff Bart, he endured the relentless barrage of racial slurs, knowing the audience's laughter hinged on his presence. The villains were idiots, yes, and their bigotry was ridiculed, but a black man still had to absorb the language Hollywood historically used to demean and exclude people like him. Was Little reclaiming racist language, turning it against the oppressors, or was he performing the labor of blackness for the comfort and amusement of white audiences, a cushion for their enjoyment of righteous satire?
I often said that a lot of what I've learned in comedy, I learned from him at that time, because he would give me little ideas of something that could work and be funny. And so it's kind of fun to meet somebody again that you've worked with.
In this sense, satire functions simultaneously as shield and weapon. A shield for Brooks and the studio, protection from accusations of racism under the banner of "the joke is against the racists," and a weapon aimed at the communities being represented. The exaggerated accents, the physical comedy, the caricatured stereotypes, do they dismantle prejudice, or do they slyly repurpose it for entertainment? The laughter may feel subversive, but it comes at a cost. The black performer must endure, negotiate, and carry the film's moral weight. This is the lasting dilemma of Blazing Saddles. It is celebrated as a comedy milestone, a high watermark of fearless satire. Yet beneath the laughter lurks an uncomfortable question. Did Hollywood truly confront racism, or did it merely dress it up as comedy, giving audiences permission to laugh while keeping structural inequities intact? Cleavon Little's Bart was brilliant, revolutionary, and audacious, but he also bore the compromise, embodying both the film's genius and its moral ambiguity. The uncomfortable truth: satire is messy, especially when wielded in a system built on exploitation. Blazing Saddles may punch up, but someone always catches the punches. And in this case, it was the black man holding the reins of the joke while the audience laughed, unaware of the deeper stakes. One of the most striking and puzzling aspects of Blazing Saddles' legacy is Cleavon Little's near-total silence about his experience. Unlike Richard Pryor or other actors who openly dissected their encounters with racially charged material, Little left behind no detailed reflections on whether he felt demeaned, empowered, or conflicted as Sheriff Bart. On the surface, this quietness can look like tacit approval. Perhaps he bought into Mel Brooks' vision, embraced the satire, and understood the film as groundbreaking social commentary.
I was very brave. I had Final Cut, so the studio actually legally couldn't trim it. They couldn't cut anything.
But the deeper, more controversial reading suggests something far more complex. Was Little truly comfortable with the relentless racial slurs hurled at him on camera, the exaggerated stereotypes, and the crude ass-Ewell jokes? Or was he simply performing the only role available to a black actor in 1973 Hollywood, the role of silence? Consider the production context. Brooks' set was notoriously chaotic, often testing the boundaries of actors' comfort zones. Cleavon Little once recounted in rare interviews the challenge of filming the infamous "I Must Be Dreaming" sequence, where townsfolk lob increasingly absurd racial insults at Sheriff Bart. Reports from crew members suggest that while Little maintained his composure on camera, off-set he was quietly frustrated with the overtly demeaning material. Unlike Pryor, whose defiance and candidness were part of his persona, Little was a classically trained, theater-honed actor navigating a system stacked against him. In that context, silence may have been less choice and more strategy, a calculated survival mechanism. There's an added layer of irony. Blazing Saddles vaulted Little into the cultural spotlight, making him the first black sheriff in a comedic western, a symbol of authority, intelligence, and defiance. Yet the film also became his defining role, a double-edged sword. His career after Bart never scaled the heights it might have. There were opportunities, yes, but the Hollywood gatekeepers often pigeonholed him. Some colleagues have hinted that Little was passed over for leading roles in other projects because studio executives feared his association with overtly racialized comedy would typecast him, or worse, make him a liability in a still segregated industry. One particularly controversial incident occurred during a screening with Brooks, when the cast watched the chocolate-covered candy sequence, a moment where blackface and exaggerated caricatures were deployed for laughs. Little reportedly gave minimal reaction, which some read as complicity, but insiders suggest he was quietly assessing the audience's reception, aware that any public criticism could be career-ending. The tension was palpable. The very satire meant to lampoon racism was simultaneously a showcase of Little's vulnerability. The real tension lies in the contrast between Bart and Little. On screen, Bart walks tall, confident, and unflinching in the face of racism. Off-screen, Little's public posture was far more cautious, even muted. His silence becomes a statement in itself, ambiguous, layered, and uncomfortable. It could be read as a quiet endorsement of Brooks' audacity, or as proof that even in satire, black actors were still forced to swallow discomfort to survive in Hollywood. Adding to the controversy, reports from the time indicate that certain promotional interviews pressured Little to comment on the film's racial material. Journalists would ask, "Did the jokes bother you?" A question that placed him in a no-win scenario. If he criticized the film, he risked alienating Brooks and the industry elite. If he praised it, he risked being seen as complicit in perpetuating stereotypes. Little's measured responses, polite but non-committal, highlight the systemic limitations black actors faced. Even in a progressive comedy, autonomy over one's narrative was tightly constrained.
Is that the first day of shooting was a scene where I'm in the office and he's signing, I'm trying to get him to sign something, and there's a whole thing with a paddle. And I was working to it. That was the first day, and I felt like I had to work.
Ultimately, Little's silence may be the film's subtlest commentary. The bravest gestures of representation often come at a personal cost. In celebrating Bart's defiance, audiences rarely stop to consider the invisible tightrope Little walked, navigating a system that demanded laughter at his own expense, while leaving him no safe avenue to dissent. In hindsight, that silence is both his shield and his prison. A calculated negotiation with an industry that was ready to celebrate the character of the black hero, yet simultaneously erase the human behind the role. Nearly 50 years after its release, Blazing Saddles isn't just remembered, it's canonized. The Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry, declaring it a cultural milestone and cementing its status as one of America's most important comedies. Critics continue to hail it as a masterclass in satire, a lightning strike of irreverence that proved Hollywood could mock racism while making audiences laugh until they cried. Yet the story of its legacy is far messier than nostalgia suggests. Behind the accolades lies a history riddled with tension, discomfort, and controversy. From the very beginning, the film was polarizing. Warner Bros. Executives were reportedly terrified by Mel Brooks' script, arguing that the film's unflinching use of racial slurs and absurd stereotypes could provoke backlash. Test screenings were chaotic. Some audiences laughed uncontrollably at the audacity, while others walked out, offended by jokes that were deliberately over the top. Cleavon Little's casting as Sheriff Bart itself was groundbreaking but controversial. At a time when black actors were largely relegated to subservient or comedic sidekick roles, Little's Bart was intelligent, suave, and commanding, a direct inversion of Hollywood norms. However, behind the scenes, there were whispered doubts about whether audiences could accept a black lead humiliating white townsfolk. Some historians suggest that Brooks' insistence on Bart's dignity was a radical act in itself, one that challenged systemic biases in Hollywood and American society.
One of the best things in the movie was Madeline. Madeline Kahn was maybe the single best comedian that ever lived. But
even the film's premiere ignited debates. While mainstream audiences celebrated its irreverence, civil rights activists were divided. Some saw Brooks' satire as a clever weapon against bigotry, while others worried it trivialized the lived experiences of Black Americans. The famous T-Town scene, a chaotic, vulgar, and shocking sequence where the town literally descends into absurd anarchy, was criticized for bordering on exploitation, raising questions about whether shock value was being mistaken for meaningful critique. Fast forward to 2025, and the film occupies a paradoxical space. Venerated, yes, but also cautiously excused. Modern streaming platforms like HBO Max attach a contextual disclaimer before the movie begins, warning viewers, what you're about to see is offensive, but historically significant. That's a far cry from 1974, when audiences erupted in laughter, often oblivious to the moral gymnastics behind the jokes. The very presence of these disclaimers exposes the tension. Some argue they are essential, framing the film as a satirical critique of racism rather than casual bigotry. Others see them as sanitizing a work that was designed to be raw, shocking, and confrontational. This tension has fueled renewed controversy in academic and social circles. In 2019, a group of college students petitioned a major university library to remove the film from its classic comedy screening series, calling it tone-deaf and racially insensitive. Critics countered, insisting that the film's audacity is precisely why it should be studied, not buried. The question is whether Blazing Saddles remains daring satire or has aged into a paradoxical artifact, a classic whose audacity is more tolerated than celebrated. Some cultural commentators suggest that calling it genius is Hollywood's way of patting itself on the back for getting away with language and imagery that would be unthinkable today. Others defend it as untouchable, a comedy so audacious it had to go places no other film dared, forcing audiences to confront bigotry with laughter as the weapon. Consider the legacy of specific scenes. The musical number I'm Tired features a blackface cameo, a bold historical reference meant to lampoon racist performance traditions. But in modern viewings, it sparks discomfort and debate about whether satire can justify appropriating harmful imagery. Similarly, the infamous campfire scene, where townsfolk repeatedly use racial slurs in a deliberately absurd fashion, was intended as ridicule of bigotry. Yet contemporary audiences often interpret it literally, sparking arguments that satire no longer translates in a society hyper-aware of representation politics. The ultimate irony is that what was once radical is now treated with kid gloves. A film that dared to depict a black sheriff humiliating a racist town is now prefaced with warnings, as if audiences need a guide to understand the joke. Satire that once smashed doors open is now wrapped in protective packaging, highlighting a broader truth. Cultural boundaries shift faster than our reverence for classics. In this light, Blazing Saddles is both a triumph and a cautionary tale. It reminds us how powerful comedy can be in challenging prejudice, and how fragile that power is when cultural sensibilities evolve. 50 years later, the film still makes us laugh, but it also forces us to ask, are we celebrating its audacity, or simply giving it a historical pass? And somewhere in the middle sits Cleavon Little's Sheriff Bart, as bold, subversive, and revolutionary as ever, even if modern audiences now approach him with footnotes, disclaimers, and scholarly essays trying to unpack what used to be pure, unfiltered comedic rebellion. What made Sheriff Bart so radical wasn't just that he was a black sheriff in a whitewashed Western. It was how Cleavon Little fully embodied him. Amid every insult, every slur, every slapstick absurdity, Bart never cracked. He wasn't angry, broken, or bitter. He was cool, razor-sharp, charming, and always 10 steps ahead of the fools around him. In a genre dominated by white gunslingers, here was a black man commanding the room with intellect and poise, a figure whose authority couldn't be mocked or diminished. Critics at the time, and even today, hailed Little's performance as revolutionary. He redefined what a comedic hero could look like: polished, sophisticated, and the voice of reason in a town drowning in ignorance. For black audiences, Bart was a symbol of resilience and quiet power, dismantling bigotry without ever sacrificing dignity. He was clever enough to outwit prejudice, yet unthreatening enough for a 1970s audience to accept him as the lead. But beneath that brilliance lies a subtle controversy. By making Bart nearly flawless, unflappable in the face of racism, endlessly witty under pressure, the film may have inadvertently created an unrealistic standard for black representation. The implicit message became, if you are black in this world, you must excel, you must entertain, you must remain endlessly charming and composed. Only then can you exist without being crushed by prejudice. Bart's perfection was liberating, yes, but it also risked burdening black characters and actors with the expectation of superhuman resilience. Some historians and cultural critics argue that this paradox is part of the film's complexity. In 1974, such an approach may have been strategic. The only way mainstream audiences would accept a black hero leading a comedy this audacious. Bart's charm softened the shock of seeing a black man humiliate white racists on screen, turning what could have been incendiary into palatable satire. But 50 years later, the question lingers: does Sheriff Bart's perfection empower or subtly constrain? Does it encourage viewers to admire black brilliance? Or does it reinforce the idea that black humanity must always be performed and earned rather than accepted? After 50 years, Blazing Saddles remains a lightning rod, a film that dared to offend, shock, and challenge Hollywood's deepest taboos. And yet, even as we celebrate its satire, one forbidden scene reminds us that there were limits the studio wouldn't cross. What was too dangerous to show then might finally see the light today. And when it does, it could change everything we thought we knew about the film's audacity. That's it for today. See you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.